Hi, today I thought I would go over how I put the clay on the cutting mats and the various different ways that I have found that it works. So just a little 101 on the Curio. So when you get your Curio, you get the main base, which is a hard plastic doohickey, and you get platforms. So you've got one that is 1 millimeter, and it's marked with a 1, which I put a little marker on so it's easier to see. You get two number 2s, which are 2 millimeters, and then you get a cutting mat, which is 1 millimeter. It also comes with an embossing mat that has a kind of a squishy, foamy thing on it. I don't really use that for anything. So what I prefer to do is I prefer to use these cutting mats. They're template plastic, and they're about 1/2 millimeter usually. It depends on what plastic she has when she cuts them. They're translucent. They come from craftchameleon.com. And what they're made for is they're made for cutting out templates to hold the acrylic pieces while you etch them. But I found that they make really, really good mats for polymer. And when you're messing around with your settings and trying to figure out what's going to work right for your project, you're not going to mess up your expensive cutting mat. And the problem with these guys is, if you can see there, it's probably hard, but if you can see there, the thing that has the grid on it is really a very thin piece of plastic. So if you get even the littlest nick in there from your blade, it's not stuck anywhere else except for on the edges. And so it tends to buckle when you're cutting and can cause all kind of problems. And plus these guys are expensive, so you don't want to be messy. You're going to mess them up enough. You don't want to give it any more abuse than necessary. So what I do is, for most settings, you're going to take out the 1. You have the 2 2s. Then I put in one of the Craft Chameleon mats that's in place of the 1. Put my cutting mat on, and then put the Craft Chameleon mat on top. Now see, the reason I love this is because it's already got the holes that fit onto the platform cut in. And that way it's really going to stay on there sturdy. It's not going to go moving around. So you've got your little pegs and your little clips. And so you can it's a little easier if you do just a couple at a time. So by putting the cutting mat underneath the Craft Chameleon mat, you're still going to be able to see the grid. So you're going to know where you've placed it on your computer, on the software, and you'll be able to line it up. And that's one of the reasons that I love the Curio over a Cameo and really actually any of the other digital cutters, is because it's always going to orient itself right back to that same spot. And you can take it out and you can reload it. It's always going to come back to that main spot. So I like to double protect my little clips from coming up. So I just take a little bit of blue painter's tape and stick it on there. And that just keeps them from popping up. You don't really want it to pop up when you're in the midst of cutting, because if it happens back behind the machine, then you're going to have a problem with it. So I'm going to come back in a second with some clay to put on it, and I'll see you then. Okay, so I'm back with my clay. This is about 1.5 millimeters. It's a 7 on my Dream Machine. It's about a 4 or maybe a 5 on most of the pasta machines. So I'm going to line it up with wherever I have my clay lined up on in the studio software. And I'm going to rub it down just with my hands at first, because that way I can feel if there's any air bubbles in there. And then I'm going to take a piece of cardstock, not paper, because the paper could wrinkle and give you indentions in your clay. So I use some scrap cardstock, and I use a brayer to brayer it down so that it's really, really stuck on there good. And then I'm going to kind of peel it away, make sure it's not pulling up anywhere, and one more time I'm going to rub my fingers against there, and I can feel whether there is any air bubbles or not. In fact, I feel one about there. Yeah, much better. Okay. And then you need to obviously load it into your machine. So there is this little teeny tiny notch here, right there, that's your lineup thing. But you can't see that when you're doing it unless you're like right on top of it. So I just make sure that I get the matte part past the wheel, and then you're good to go. And then when you turn it on, it's gonna come back to that spot, which we'll do in a minute because I need to get the quartz. Okay, so a little bit of what's going on over here. So you have your power. This is where your plug goes in. This is where your USB goes to your computer. This is your power. This is your load and unload, and this is your pause. So you saw what happened there. It comes right back to that center part right there when you load it up. And let's unload it. If you click the load unload right there, now the power light is flashing. Now I can move this out and I can put it back in. I can hit it again to reload it. It's going to come back to the same spot. Okay? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the tools that we're going to use, that I like to use. So this is your typical ratchet blade that comes with your curio. And this is the deep cut blade. So you never are going to cut your clay with the caps on. So very gently, you're going to just kind of grab it and unscrew it like that, so that you get the full range of the blade. And that's very, very important. The deep cut blade comes with a red cap that's handled the exact same way. Okay. When you go on to the PC Silly Lovers page, the Facebook page, there are in the files section, there are directions on what settings you want to use for all of the different tools based on the thickness of the clay that you're cutting. Okay, so we're just going to use the deep cut because I already have that one set. And then for engraving, you have a couple of options. So the Curio comes with this, it's called the fine embossing tool, and it's basically a ball stylus. And this works good for a lot of applications. It's just, it's not very precise. I don't want to say precise. It's like a stylus. It's not pointed. It's like a stylus. Okay, so that can be used for certain things. And then my favorite etching and engraving tool is the Shomus Creations engraving tip that is made for the Silhouette products. And it is carbide steel blade. And, well, it's not a blade, it's a tip that has, let's see if you can tell how, it's a nice little point to it. So you can get a much finer line with this than you can with the fine embossing tool. So we're going to put that in there. So I always put my, let's bring this a little closer. I always put my cutting tool in the red line, the red circle tool side, and the engraving one in the blue. And the reason I do that is because when you're working in your studio software, all of your cut lines are automatically going to be red. So it makes it really easy, really simple. Okay, so that's done. what we're going to do is I have this Celtic bowl that I was going to make, and so what I want to do is I'm going to go in there, and as you can see, all of my lines are red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here and ungroup, release compound path, and ungroup. Okay. And now I'm going to go in, and for all of these red lines, I'm going to change them to blue because those are the ones that I want to etch. So I can actually go in and select, hold down my shift key, and I can select a bunch of these at the time and change the lines to blue. So basically I'm going to go in, I'm going to change all of the lines for the interior parts to blue, and the exterior cut lines and the inside cuts will still all be red. So I'll do that and then come back. Okay, so I've gone in, I've changed all of my engraving lines to blue, left the cut ones for red. I've come to the send panel, I'm on the cut by line. I make sure that I do the blue first and then do the cut. So we're going to etch first, cut later, but we'll go over that. That's actually in the details from my blog on this particular pattern, and I'm going to go in and change that one. So I've clicked the two colors that I want to work with. This red is a weird red that's left over from something else. I'm making sure that my blade is in the red and my etch tool is in the blue. Okay, and so now I'm going to send it. Okay, so if you don't have the Craft Chameleon mats, or you're waiting for them to come and you just can't be patient enough to wait for them to come, then what I previously had used before I found that was Reynolds freezer paper, and it's plastic coated, used for arts and crafts, as you can see. So the reason I ended up working with this is for number one most important thing to ever know about any of this is don't ever put your clay straight down onto your cutting mat. You're going to ruin the mat, you're going to get gunk all over your clay, and it's just, you're going to cry. So let's not have anybody crying. So what I figured out to use was this freezer paper, and why it works well is because on the back side it's just plain paper, and on the front side it's waxed, so it will attach down to your mat very nicely. Okay, and you want to go in there, and I normally have my little squeegees right near me to get it down really nicely, but we're gonna hope for the best here. Again, use your brayer. And I find a rubber brayer for some reason works better with this than using your regular lucite brayer. I don't know why, but it doesn't. So now you have your waxy side up. Okay. So now I'm going to, and you can still see through this somewhat. So you can match up your lines to wherever you have your clay on your on your software mat. And we're going to do the same thing that we did the other way. We're going to feel it first with our hands, and that feels pretty good. So then we're going to put the piece of cardstock down on top, and then go over it with the brayer. Be careful when you pull it up. And let's check it one more time. And that's good. So if you have a curl up, like this is happening over here, or if your mat is older, it doesn't have to have all of it sticky, because you can just put the blue painter's tape around and that will hold it down. So when you are cutting, your goal is to cut through the clay but barely nick the freezer paper. That way, when everything's been cut, you can pull up the whole thing as one, which will keep everything together, And then you can remove the bits that you've cut out that you don't want to be the clay. So that just kind of keeps it all together, and doesn't stretch anything when you go to pull it off. If it goes through the freezer paper, it's still okay. It's not horrible. You're just going to have to peel whatever paper is, stuck on. You might not be able to pull it up as cleanly as you can when it's all one piece, so you can put a blade under there to kind of help it along if you need to. But you can pretty much get your settings to do it so that for the most part it doesn't cut through the freezer paper. And that's my goal and what I worked on for all of my settings. But even I have cases where it doesn't like it that day and it's going to cut all the way through. And that's another reminder, is every machine is different, every clay is different, so you always want to test your settings, even if it worked the day before. I can't answer why things seem to go differently on different days, but it has happened to me as well. So it's not as bad when you're working with just a solid color clay. But if say this were a veneer or cane designs or whatever that took you a really long time to get it to look the way you wanted it to, then I would test your setting and test your cut before you actually put what you really want to cut down. So those are the two ways that I like to do it. When I first started, I think I used the back of a light hold Silhouette mat at the time, which, by the way, was very similar in, it was this kind of plastic, and so that's why it worked. So when I saw these, that's why I knew it was going to be great. They changed the mats after I did that particular class on Craft Cast, and now all of the mats are that shiny, slick cutting mat surface, and it holds, but not as well. And of course that was before the Curio came along anyway. In some cases I have used clear contact paper, and that's if I've got something that has a lot of pieces being cut out of it and that I'm going to layer on top of another piece. That way I can see through it when I'm moving stuff around trying to layer it. But that's few and far between. And again, it's the sticky side down to the mat, and you don't want to put clay on sticky surfaces because that's not going to do you any good. But again, I'm going to go, this is the way to go. These are perfect. I just love them. Even if you do kind of nick into it, it's not a huge deal. If you do, and they're only like, I think they're $1.39 or $29 on the Craft Chameleon site. I usually buy them about 10 at a time because I use them for all kinds of stuff. But and I'm also doing a lot of testing of product at the same time on cut settings and files and all that kind. So I buy 10 at a time. But so obviously less expensive than, I think it's the best deal you're going to find on these guys are like $7.99 or $9.99. And you rarely can use a coupon at Michael's or Hobby Lobby or Joann's or wherever you shop. Most Silhouette stuff doesn't go on sale. Sometimes the accessories do, but you almost always can't use your 50 off type thing. So hopefully that's answered some questions for some people, and I'm going to try and do some, frequent videos when questions come up to try and help you guys along. I love this machine for all kinds of production work and everything, and there's all different kinds of things that you can do with it to help your business along, or even just your crafting. And so we'll come up with some of those later. So thanks so much.